Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel once again. Today I bring you the case of Juliana Samboni. This highly requested case, particularly when I mentioned it would be Latin American, is terrible. You're going to feel a helplessness that you probably haven't felt in any other case. It was requested so much, and I think I understand why. Perhaps it's necessary to tell what happened in order to restore some dignity to Juliana and her family. I also want to mention that this case is developing rapidly. Not only did the authorities act with great speed, but also the main culprit of all this, acted within hours. So, one would say that if the case develops on the same day and is discovered on the same day, it would be much easier to tell and clarify. However, it is not, and we are going to see why. Or at least it was not at that very moment. Now we have all the answers or the vast majority of the things we wonder when we hear about everything that happened. Get comfortable, because we're going to be here for a long time looking at this case, as it has quite a few things to discuss. There are videos, there are several news items that we need to highlight, and 2 different trials. So get comfortable, grab something to eat, something to drink, and listen to this case. This all occurred in Colombia in 2016, but the legal processes weren't finalized until 2019, allowing us to finally discuss it. The girl you are seeing right now is Juliana Andrea Samboni, born on June 26, 2009. At this point, she was a very happy girl. According to her father, she already had aspirations even at her young age of 7 years old. She played at wanting to be a doctor, to be a queen. She was close to her family and told them everything. Juliana had just finished kindergarten at Tambo, the place where she had spent her first 5 years of life. Her dad talks about her very fondly. He worked hard to be able to give her everything she needed, to give her little things she wanted. Juliana grew up in this house with her sister Nicole and parents, Juvencio and Nelly. They were located in a low-income neighborhood, in a house too small for the number of people there were. Juliana's parents decided that the best thing they could do to improve their situation was to go somewhere else in search of more work and more opportunities. That's how they end up in the city of Bogota. Juvencio took any available job. Until that day, he worked in construction. He had managed to get a fairly stable job at a construction company. Juliana's mother worked hard and took whatever job was available. This small house I'm showing you was located in the Bosque Calderon neighborhood of Bogota, Colombia. The family had been dealing with a major problem regarding the crops at their previous location. They lived in a place where the pay was not good and the conditions in which they lived were not sufficient to raise a family. They arrive in Bogota seeking a better life, as previously mentioned. At this moment, before the events, they seemed to have a very peaceful life. They were improving, they were working. They felt they had managed to escape from any problem they had before. The Bogota family was large. Juliana and her sister previously lived with their cousins at their uncle's house, who also share stories about her life there. This family had the desire to be able to buy a house that would allow them to have a better life, so that Juliana and her sister could have good studies, so that they would have everything their parents wished for. It should be added that this family is what is known as Yanacona, an ethnic group that may later be important to understand the logic that the parents used at the end of the case, after the trial. But that's all I have to say for now. Let's remember that the girl was only 7 years old, and therefore I don't have too much to tell you. There's not much more to delve into since we're talking about a little girl. We can only talk about her family and everything they did to get to this place to get a better life, thinking that they really could have a nice future in this new city. So let's get straight to the facts. All of this begins on December 4th, 2016, when Juliana was just 7 years old. The little girl was outside her house in her neighborhood, playing with her cousin near the highway. All of this happens very early in the morning. Remember, as I said before, that this happens all day long, and the beginning of this story happens very early. Everything seemed to be fine, as he was always playing, until a silver Nissan X-Trail pulled up in front of them. From this same truck, a man gets out and asks Juliana and her cousin if they know a certain address. He asks if they knew the way. The thing is, Juliana didn't know the area very well. She hadn't been living there for long, plus she was only 7 years old. And her cousin didn't know either, so they told him no. They insist they don't know anything about this address, and the man asks them to come a little closer to look at the paper he had in his hand with that address. At that moment, she approaches the car to better see the address he had, and this man takes her away. In fact, you can see on a camera how the van approaches the place where she is playing, and a man gets out to get back in seconds later and take her away. You can even see how the car is approaching the camera that sees it gradually getting closer and leaving the place, so we have a close-up of the van, which was very useful in this case. Immediately, Juliana's cousin goes inside the house and tells the parents what just happened. He was obviously desperate, so the parents didn't hesitate to go out and see if the car was still there. It had already left. The first thing they do after verifying that the car is gone is to call the police, who in fact acted quite quickly. It's something I must point out since it's not common for the police to act quickly, but being a case involving a girl, it's understandable. The protocol with an adult is not the same. The thing is, this whole case is a pursuit. They were following this van and the kidnapper all day long. Even though they had many ways to keep track of this person, the police probably couldn't have prevented what ultimately happens. As I said before, they could see the van on the cameras, which led them to conclude that this person had passed by the same place 2 other times, on 2 different days. Everything we know about what happened comes from the testimonies of the neighbors. The first time the van approached, this man who was inside offered Juliana money to come closer. We even found out that this person tried to grab her, that he had her in his hands and she broke free. The second time he came back, but this time Juliana was with her friends playing, so instead of just leaving, he decided to invite everyone into the car. He wanted all the kids to get in the van. The kids obviously didn't do it. He couldn't accomplish his goal, so he left. And he came back this third time, in which he managed to take her away. It was then concluded that this man had been planning this, and that he had obviously been carrying out the same plan to take the same person for days. Or maybe to some other child or several children from the same area. We can deduce that he probably also didn't feel any fear. He had no risk in his mind about what could happen. Going 3 times through the same place, he obviously felt that nothing bad could happen to him. We will see later why this person perhaps thought there would be no risk in kidnapping children from this place. It is also thanks to these recordings that we managed to know the license plate of the van, which was 500BO 960. With it, they come to know the name of the person who owns the Nissan. The van was registered in the name of Francisco Uribe Noguera's wife, Noguera, who the police quickly contacted. The police called Francisco, and he seems to not understand anything. He didn't know what was going on and didn't recognize why they would be calling him about the van. So what they did was summon him to better explain everything that had happened. When he meets with the officers, they explain to him that the Nissan van, which was in his wife's name, had been used for a kidnapping. We don't know if he was playing dumb or if he really didn't understand what was going on, but he says at that moment that he didn't know exactly who was driving that van. Francisco explains to the officers that in reality this van was the family's and that there wasn't just one person who drove it. This meant that it was also used by his 2 brothers. The police then begin to try to contact his brothers to see what was going on, if any of them knew anything, which ends up being a waste of time. As after a while of investigating, Francisco contacts them and tells them that in reality, the one who drove the car was his brother. It was necessary to highlight at this moment that the family was a powerful family, that they had money, that they had good jobs, and that they all had university degrees. They were well positioned, and this is precisely what perhaps made the person in question who kidnapped Juliana think that he would be away from the law, that he could probably get away with this without going to jail. Besides, his brother Francisco was a well-known lawyer, so perhaps all this that his family had a lot of money. His brother was a lawyer working for a major firm. He made him believe that he could really get away with the issue of kidnapping a low-income girl. 3 brothers are involved for the following reason. Not only Francisco and Rafael, but also their sister Catalina Uribe Noguera. Let's see then what happens the rest of the morning and afternoon. Once Francisco confirms that his brother was the one driving the van, the one who possibly kidnapped someone, he goes with the police to Rafael's apartment, where they don't find him. Fortunately, the doorman had seen the van circling the building a few times, let's say so many times that it seemed out of the ordinary. All of this happening from early in the morning. At this point then, Francisco separates from the police and they start looking for Rafael everywhere. For hours they don't get a single piece of news about his whereabouts or where he could be. Until suddenly around 5 in the afternoon, Francisco calls them again and gives them some somewhat disturbing news. He first tells them that he was heading with his brother to a guard post, as he was in a quite serious health condition. The officers enter the hospital and realize that Francisco is not letting them see his brother, as he says his health condition is so serious that he cannot allow such a thing. He tells them they can't go in, calls his lawyer for a while, and later tells them the truth. He informs the officers that Rafael had actually killed Juliana, but that it had all been an accident. Let's say that from this point on, when the media found out about all of this and who had been the guilty or supposed guilty party, it was thought that Rafael was really going to get away with it, that he was not going to serve any time in prison, mainly because there are many cases of this style in which people with money simply do not pay. On top of everything, up to that point, it seemed as if his brother was covering for him. It seemed as if Francisco was planning everything so that the police would not catch him, to delay the trial, to delay bringing him to justice. But well, we'll see that later on and keep your opinions to have a good discussion at the end. Francisco told the police that Rafael had informed him that the girl's body was in the ECUS 66 building in apartment 603 in a jacuzzi. From this point, Francisco goes with the police to this apartment in the EQS 66. Upon arriving at the duplex that actually belonged to his mother, they find a dirty place on the first floor. This apartment was without any furniture since in fact no one was living there at that moment, and it had oil all over the floor. It was everywhere, on the floor, stairs, and second floor. It also had cigarette butts and a few alcohol bottles. Then they moved to the second floor where the jacuzzi was, and let me tell you, the girl was not in it. But underneath, this jacuzzi had about a 60 centimeter space underneath where clearly the machinery was. A few things that the jacuzzi had underneath. She was inside that space under the jacuzzi. She was naked and covered in oil, just like the rest of the apartment. But what is most shocking today, and what becomes so difficult today to say, years have passed and it still remains one of the things that shocked me the most about a case because of the cruelty. On top of him, on top of his body, there was a demon, as if it were a prize or a gift, as if everything he did was something to admire, as if it was something he wanted to do. It was an achievement. And every time I started to review the case and every time I returned to this part, I still had the same feeling that everything he had already done was not enough. He had to leave a sign of an even greater lack of respect. He was already at the limit and he surpassed it. It didn't seem enough to him. The girl's clothes were found in a toilet backpack in the bathroom, which clearly also meant that she had wanted to make the clothes disappear. The oil also, for those who do not know it, erases some traces of the crime. It's possible to hide marks of abuse so that the culprit's actions are concealed. She has obviously tried to cover up everything that happened. Clearly it was Rafael. He himself admitted it later in the prosecutor's office. So they went to the hospital and read him his full charges. And from that point on, justice took its course. Which we'll see later. He had kidnapped, abused, murdered the girl, and later tried to cover up the tracks with oil. So, he had committed so many crimes that one would definitely think he would go to prison for life. To clarify, the maximum sentence in Colombia at that time was 60 years. So, what happens? It's not exactly a life sentence, and it wasn't what most people were asking for, nor what the parents deserved. But, well, it's what was available at that time, and it's what they tried to enforce. The issue is that the initial sentence he received was only 45 years. He was 15 short of reaching 60, and that seemed quite unfair. So the prosecution then asked for the maximum penalty, and they ended up giving him 58 years. Let's move on to the most important details of the autopsy. The body was covered in oil, making tests difficult but not impossible. In these, Traces of Raphael's deoxyribonucleic acid were found, confirming not only abuse but also that he was clearly the responsible one. In addition, the girl had bites on her face. Lastly, it should be mentioned that the cause of death was suffocation and asphyxiation, which means that not only had he tried to strangle her, but he also blocked her airways. But then, we have to discuss a small issue that was up until this year, until August of 2019, and that is whether the brothers had anything to do with it or not. If they knew about all this, if they helped hide the evidence, what they did, and if they really had anything to do with this case. Much of this problem was based on Francisco's attitude and the cameras of ECUS 66, apart from certain text messages exchanged between the brothers and the family. First of all, we have to discuss the videos and the exact times at which they entered the place. It is stated that Francisco communicates before 2 with the police and later calls him to say that he is taking his brother to the hospital at 5. Then there is a period in which he did not tell the police that he knew where Raphael was. It is this period in which we are going to be seeing the cameras on Sunday, February 4 at 3:32 p.m. Catalina Noguera is seen arriving at the building, and 10 minutes later, Francisco is seen entering behind her. At 3:46 in the afternoon, you can see how Francisco arrives at the terrace and jumps a wall to be able to enter the duplex. As I said before, the duplex had a jacuzzi and therefore was on the top floor of the building, which was actually the terrace, and the terrace was divided by some walls. He jumps from the wall, clearly visible on camera, up close, showing his face and everything. And then the last thing you see is them leaving the building 2 to 3 hours later. That is, at this point, when he gets to the duplex through the wall, he already knew something had happened. It was no longer just the police looking for him for an alleged kidnapping, but now he had arrived at the building and found the car. Before going up, he asked the doorman where the van was. It was not in its usual place, but was in the basement. Not only did this seem strange to him, but when he went to open the car once downstairs, he discovers a child-sized shoe, let's say. A child's shoe, according to him. At that moment, for everything. That is, at that moment, everything changes. His perception of what was happening turns around. However, he decides that he must first find his brother to clarify everything that was happening. Only then does he go up to the duplex and pass through the wall. Francisco comes from the second floor where the jacuzzi was, sees that there was oil everywhere, gets into the jacuzzi since he couldn't just enter the house, and from there he starts talking to his sister, who was listening from the first floor door since she couldn't get into the duplex. He talks for a while. She smelled cigarette smoke, and since she couldn't enter because the door was obviously jammed, Francisco decides to jump from the second floor, delicately, and get to the first one. On the first floor, at Sanem, as I said before, there were no furniture or anything because nobody lived there. However, by the time he arrived, everything was already full of oil. Which for some reason didn't seem entirely strange to him since, according to him, his brother had addiction problems and was also an alcoholic and sometimes did that thing that I need you to remember, because anyway, it seems to me that it's a lie to try to take away some intention from what he did. But, well, let's continue on the first floor. He finds his brother in a room with a balcony that leads outside, trying to jump. It is then that he stops him and begins to interrogate him, asking him where the girl was and what he had done with her. He wanted to know, he wanted to confirm everything that was happening. Francisco implies that everything about the oil, the cigarettes, the alcohol was already there before he arrived. Raphael did all of that directly and he had no involvement in it. Despite interrogations, Raphael refused to divulge anything. He withheld information from him about his actions with the girl and clothes and his reasons for throwing oil all over. Until Francisco insisted enough for him to tell him that the girl was dead and that it had been an accident. In reality, she had jumped out of the car. However, this is a contradiction. When he started to talk, he told him different things. The girl initially gave a different account, then jumped from the car, but it remained an accident. Francisco, exhausted by the events, finally confides in his visibly distressed and crying sister. She enters the apartment and begins to search for the girl everywhere, hoping that she was alive, hidden somewhere. The main issue to discuss here, despite everything that may seem suspicious, is that Francisco called his lawyers instead of directly calling the police when he had been communicating with them before. That is, he could have directly called the officers, even called 911, and reported that he had the possible murderer of a girl. What he did was directly call some colleagues and his lawyer. However, looking at it from a lawyer's point of view, I would say that is the normal procedure. Obviously, a trial was going to take place. Obviously, his brother was guilty of something. He said that although he was unsure of the exact details, he knew there would be a trial and that he would need a lawyer and everything else. It's common procedure to call the defense. For many, calling the police directly would have been the right choice, as nothing could be avoided since he had lied and was lying to her in that moment. He concealed a body evidence and tried to erase all traces of his actions with oil. And besides, he had tried to throw himself out of the apartment, so maybe it would have been prudent to directly call the police. Moreover, they were trapped inside for 3 hours. She received and continues to receive criticism for this very reason. Let's discuss the messages exchanged within the family. There were many that didn't imply too much. It didn't imply that they were guilty of all this or that they had really tried to help Rafael at that time, but they deleted the messages that had to do with this, so that part is the one that intrigues the most. In the WhatsApp application, Catalina and her mother were discussing a bit about what was happening with Rafael before they could enter. Catalina writes the following to her mother. I called him 11 times and he didn't answer and turned off the cell phone. Francisco entered through the terrace of the 66 apartment. He's inside and I'm waiting for him to open up or say something. And it's after finding him, after already being in the hospital, that she tells him the following. I told him not to take the heart pills. The mother responds, telling him that they love him deeply and he should focus on himself. The best thing for us is for him to stop suffering. Tell him that we love him and will always love him. Catalina responds, I already told him. He wants to die, Mom. I don't know how to help him. The mother says, let him be. And Catalina ends with the following. Yes, but they won't let him here. They forced him to take his heart pills. They were obviously talking about how this man could very well die. That they loved him and what they preferred. That his pain would end, in quotes, so to speak, for them for some reason. He was suffering, but I have something that seems important to start discussing right now, because later they are judged with respect precisely to everything I just said. And it seems to me, given all these things, that the brothers were not really involved in this situation. They didn't know what Rafael was doing. Maybe because of the years lived for being family, they knew he was into something weird. They knew that probably he was not very normal, that he had something strange, but it does not mean that they would have been involved in this case or that they would have really tried to cover it up. Think about it this way. The police called Francisco's wife to tell her that her van was involved in something related to a kidnapping. Then Francisco contacts them and they talk about the van and who it really belongs to or who was driving it. He finds out by talking to his family that his brother was the last one to have the Nissan. As he describes, he was talking to the police. He was with them when he gets the call that Rafael might be in this building. So he goes without saying goodbye to the police or anything to try to verify that his brother was really there and that something was really happening or what was happening. He goes to the building, checks where the car is, goes down to where the car is, goes up seeing the little girl's shoe. With that in mind, he gets to the apartment, gets in, nobody wanted to open, so he invades the duplex and sees his brother lying there. He then opens the door to his sister from the apartment, who was also worried. She starts looking for everything, and they stay talking for a while about what just happened. I think that it took quite a while until he could get into the apartment. So of those 3 hours or 2.5 hours that passed there, a part was just about simply getting into the place. And what I'm saying is that probably if they were expecting this to happen, given that they had money, given that Francisco was a lawyer, they would already have everything ready. They would not have shown up at the building, they would not have appeared on the cameras, they would not have been involved, nor would they have been deleting messages, because obviously that made them a bit more guilty. I mean, the way in which all this happened makes me believe that although probably inside the building, they tried to talk to Rafael and tried to see if they could solve the whole problem. They decided or did not manage to cover it up, meaning everything was already done. He had thrown all the oil everywhere. He had obviously killed the girl. He had done a lot of things that were no longer defensible. So, they directly discussed for a while. They went into the apartment and left. He had only two options: either tell the police directly or go into the apartment to check that his brother was there. And that all of this was true, or just see what was going on. Let's say he chose to follow the impulse to get to the duplex, enter, and check for himself. Despite having the risk of disturbing the scene, many argue that it seems evident that Francisco had some kind of plan from the beginning, that he had been hiding details from the police since the morning they were looking for him. But it's half true, because he always ends up saying everything he knew. He finds out that his brother was driving the van. He tells it to the police. He goes to the apartment without telling the police. Later, while at the hospital for his brother's health, he informs the police. There's no evidence they tried to hide the girl's clothes or came up with the oil or demon ideas. Street cameras show Rafael going to a supermarket and returning with the items found in the apartment, including the oil and demon. The cashier noted he didn't seem strange at all. She says that he didn't have any strange behavior. That is, she wasn't very sure that he was intoxicated in any way. But well, that's another theory. Obviously, the brothers were going to trial for being involved in some way in all of this. And this is the part I want to discuss. Maybe you have another kind of hypothesis. But the main one that was handled was that the brothers would have tried to justify what he did based on the fact that he was completely intoxicated, that he had substance abuse problems, and that he was drunk. This hypothesis suggests that perhaps when they arrived at the place, the brother was not completely intoxicated, that he was completely sober. It is then said that perhaps they did try to intoxicate him to take him to the hospital, or that perhaps they simply had a known person inside the hospital. And they got him through there without the police being able to touch him because he was seriously ill, buying him a bit of time but not too much. But that's essentially the problem, because they didn't have too much extra time. This being intoxicated, having fragile health, did nothing more than simply leave him for a while until the police arrived and read him everything he had committed. Then you can see through the cameras that they take him to the psychiatric hospital. They said at that time to take him there because they thought that maybe with the substances he had ingested, it would be best to take him there. And then you see them leave the building and go. It's while they're on their way that Rafael really tells him what he had done, that he had killed her, and then Francisco calls the police. There's one more detail before we continue with the rest of the events, and that is that the building's doorman, who obviously served as a witness, committed suicide a week after the events. He was Fernando Mercian, and it was said that this person who had seen the van circling around, who had seen the brothers enter, had seen them leave, had not actually committed suicide but had been killed. That someone made that murder look like a suicide, since simply no one could believe that a person who had so much to say about the case would suddenly disappear, that he had taken his own life. But it makes sense. You see, this man left a letter to his daughters saying he was innocent. And you may wonder, if he was innocent, why he decided to do this. And it's likely he thought they were going to use him as a scapegoat, meaning they would use him as someone who was actually innocent but would be declared guilty, or the evidence within the department would make him look guilty. Because this is what happens in these types of cases with people who have a lot of power. People without resources to defend themselves, like access to lawyers, are sometimes blamed for crimes if they were close to the scene. He probably thought this was going to happen even though he was innocent. Think that at that moment this doorman had no charges. He had nothing that directly accused him of being guilty of what happened to Juliana. But something must have pressured him to feel that they were going to make him a scapegoat, that they were going to make him the guilty party behind this case.
Rafael Mercian would have been an accomplice. Mercian, a few days after the death of the girl Juliana, took his own life.
The doorman or the guard telling me that she is downstairs wanting to go up, and I tell the guard to please not let her go up, and that anyone who comes to the apartment tell her that I am not there.
During that week that he remained alive, the question is, did anything happen? Did something happen with someone that made him feel in danger? This makes me think that the Noguera family must have threatened him or offered him money, and so he saw what was going to happen to him. And this is why he ultimately decided to take his own life. There was little doubt that Rafael was guilty based on the evidence. Despite the oil, the deoxyribonucleic acid had been recovered that proved he was entirely to blame for this death. Additionally, he concealed the clothes, the shoe was discovered in the vehicle, cameras recorded him, and there were over 25 witness statements. Some of those were in fact from children who were around in the neighborhood while he was taking Juliana away. With the cameras, in fact, it was also possible to trace the route he took with the car, in which Juliana could be seen every so often while she was still alive until the moment she was unconscious.
It's the same camera that detected the van leaving at 9:20, and that complements the perspective of the other video device. The new angle is what allows to see the girl inside the car between 9:41 when she entered the parking lot and 9:44 when she left again.
He even confessed to the prosecution that he was guilty. The big question in all of this was how he knew about the oil. How did he know that this could hide evidence? Had he received advice from someone? Hence the fact that his brother was a lawyer. Maybe some thought that he would know about the oil and that he would have told him. The issue is that, as we saw before, he had already gone to buy before Francisco arrived at the building. There was also something out of the ordinary, that the two policemen who had arrived at the scene, along with Francisco, stayed there for 2 hours instead of calling other officers or requesting the official review, bringing in the forensic team and everything else, which is what the protocol indicated. They stayed for 2 hours, forcing investigators to review computers and cell phones to try to see if there were other people involved or if there was a child trafficking network. It was thought that perhaps there would be a network simply involved because they precisely thought that Rafael could not act alone, that all this he did could not have done in the state in which he supposedly was.
Perhaps there was even a trafficking network near where Juliana and her family were located. I later changed my version and told him that the girl had gotten off at some bridges that are at 65 with Kinkunvalar. He kept asking me quite a few times where she was. He said he hoped that girl would show up, that he should pray for that girl to show up, and I later changed my version again and said that she had jumped.
He assured in his testimony given from La Tramuca prison in Valledupar via Skype that he lied to his brother Francisco about the whereabouts of the minor the afternoon of December 4th, 2016.
The defendants, Catalina and Francisco Jose Uribe Noguera, this is the crime of favoritism in heterogeneous competition with concealment, alteration, or destruction of material evidence, is absolving.
The siblings Francisco and Catalina Uribe Noguera were acquitted in the case of Juliana Samboni.
Despite the trial against Rafael taking place and having a sentence, the family refused to accept a financial reward. Many people wondered why. And this is closely related to the ethnicity I mentioned earlier. Their beliefs prohibited them from accepting the money under any circumstances. Money with children. Or this very thing that was happening to them, they decided not to take the money and continue with their jobs and their life as it already was, which leads me to the conclusion and how they have been since that moment, what happened after the events. In the year 2017, Juliana's brother, Julian Andres, was born. Consider that during pregnancies, it is normally advised not to suffer stress, try not to stress so much, try not to have bad times, and unfortunately for Nelly, this was not easy at all. She was in the middle of all this. There were the trials. There was the whole case that probably did not allow her to be in good health, and for which, yes, however, Juliana's brother was born. Well, he is fine. At first, he had some respiratory problems, as I understand, but the family is fine. Today, they continue trying to fulfill what they had planned before. They continue trying to be able to buy a house, to be able to support the family, and let's say, continue with their lives, despite what happened to them. So, well, nothing more to add. Obviously, my best wishes to the family. This was something regrettable. Something I also want to add is that Rafael is supposedly having a very hard time in jail because obviously the inmates don't like him. They have actually tried to kill him several times as far as I understand, and they have to keep him a bit away from the other inmates. But, well, this is where the video ends. Please tell me what you think below in the comments. What do you think about the brothers? Did Francisco and Catalina have anything to do with it? Did they know about Rafael's inclination? Did they know what he wanted to do? Did they sense what he was going to do? Did they have any idea that he was planning to take someone away? Did they really try to cover up for their brother? Tell me down in the comments. Let's start a discussion because this cannot be forgotten. Nothing more to add. Here on the side are my Patreons. Thank you all for supporting me through that platform. I sincerely appreciate it very much. Down below, you have the link in the description if you want to know more about it. If you want to know what a pattern is. If you want to know how to support me through that page. On the other hand, thanks to all who watch me on YouTube. It is very appreciated on my part because apart from that, you really support me in both ways. Even if you're just a YouTube viewer, commenting or liking my videos supports me. Watching the videos is supporting me. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed the week of Latin American cases. We are already 3 videos in, I think. So let's go for more. Keep recommending things to me because I don't have the latest for next week. They are not chosen yet. Send them, please send them because I will be preparing videos all week. And I forget, if you have any Christmas case you want to recommend me, leave it below in the comments. It's very, very important with nothing else to say. Here the video ends here. You have a new video. Here you have a recommended video. You can subscribe by clicking on my face and see you in another video. Goodbye.